Hello, everyone, and welcome to my Intro to the Latin Road workshop. Why study Latin? Over the next few minutes, I want to share with you my reasons and motivations for teaching Latin to my own kids beginning over 33 years ago. This study was the highlight of our homeschool experience, and I hope I can spark your interest in what has become a foundational language study called the Latin Road to English Grammar. Let me take you back quite some years ago as I share this important historical chart with you. As I finished teaching my kids the basics of spelling, writing, reading, and some simple grammar in their early elementary years, I wanted our advanced grammar to be more interesting and useful than what's provided in most English grammar textbooks these days. Although I got straight A's in English classes throughout my schooling, I remembered that English made the most sense when I studied 3 years of Spanish in high school, and we had to focus on the ideas behind the parts of speech to translate correctly. That foreign language helped me to apply the facts I knew about English, going beyond just having them defined and memorized. So I began to consider teaching our advanced grammar in the context of a foreign language, which would not only make English make more sense, but would also fulfill our foreign language for high school. Then I discovered this chart in the introductory chapter of an old, out-of-print, 1911 fourth grade public school grammar textbook that gave young students a simple look at the roots of our English vocabulary. Now, keep in mind, this is a simple chart, as there are many branches of languages that are not represented here. These are giving us a picture of those languages that most affect English. Notice that English falls under the category of Indo-European languages, and as you move down the page, you can see that English is considered a Teutonic or Germanic language in its basic structure. But it is interesting to note that we only retain about 30% of our vocabulary from those German roots, and I'll show you in a minute that this is mostly our common words. Our more scholarly, technical vocabulary comes from other languages, one of those being Greek, as shown back up the page here, where we get about 10% of our vocabulary. Probably our most common spoken languages, those most commonly taught in schools, are Spanish and French. And we see near the bottom of the page that those are directly related to Latin as their mother language. Latin is also the mother language of Italian, Portuguese, and the lesser-known Romanian. But most importantly, about 60% of our English vocabulary comes from Latin. So no other language in the world affects English as much as Latin, and I realized that this would make the best first foreign language for me and my students to study. It would not only provide us with the principles of English meanings and spellings, but it would give us a good working introduction to our most common spoken foreign languages. So, let's take a look at some other practical applications of Latin that will unfold before you as you study with me. First and foremost, Latin is the mother language of Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian, and so provides the key to these languages. I want to show you what that actually looks like. If you look at the left-hand side, you see the Latin words for the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and across the page you'll see the English words for the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They don't look related at all. We don't get the English words from Latin for our numbers and such, so they really don't look alike. But look at the Spanish, the French, Italian, the Portuguese, Romanian. By knowing Latin, you can guess at those because they are so closely related to their mother tongue. And so when we finish and have this complete view of Latin over 3 years, we have a good working introduction to 5 languages instead of just 1. Best use of my time. Number 2, Latin provides a key to the Teutonic languages. This quote is from Dorothy Sayers in the pamphlet The Lost Tools of Learning from 1947, where she's talking about classical education. Look at it with me. I will say at once quite firmly that the best grounding for education is the Latin grammar. I say this because even a rudimentary knowledge of Latin cuts down the labor and pains of learning almost any other subject by at least 50%. Now, that caught my attention because anything that could cut down the labor of what I was doing by half had my attention. But look at the next sentence here, because you often hear that Latin is a dead language. Why would you bother with it? Well, look at this sentence. It is the key to the vocabulary and structure of all the Teutonic languages, as well as to the technical vocabulary of all the sciences and to the literature of the entire Mediterranean civilization, together with all its historical documents. So you have language, you have science, you have literature, you have history. That is all a part of our American history, goes back and ties in with European history. So you have a good working vocabulary for all those subjects. And, of course, number 3, Latin promotes analytical thinking skills, which is something I wanted for my kids as they were growing up and getting more educated. I wanted them to have those thinking skills. So look at this quote from the Council of the Classical Association in 1991. I had found this while I was researching before I started writing my curriculum. This is reading, writing, and translating Latin sharpens the basic mental processes. On account of their non-English word structure and sentence patterns, the classical languages, which are Greek and Latin, have for centuries stimulated such mental qualities as what? Being observant, accurate, analytic, and logical. Thus, the mind is developed in demanding and practical ways. Well, this is a goal of what I wanted for our education, that my kids would be observant, careful, accurate, be able to analyze and look at things closely, and of course, logical in how they thought. And this could help. And of course, our kids are getting older, are looking towards what they're going to do in the higher levels. And so this has to do with the marks on SAT scores. These come out every year. And it's interesting that I picked one of those years here, but every year Latin students are at the top of the verbal scores on the SATs. And it's interesting to note that they're usually in the top 3 even for math. Math is a language of numbers, and when you start learning how a language works, as we do when we're studying Latin and having to translate, you get a good thinking process for how the language of numbers works also. And of course, a lot of people look towards word mastery. So let's look at some of this aspect of this. Now, remember when I said the 30% of our Germanic or Teutonic words that we get in our basic English are our common words. It's Latin that gives us our more scholarly or sophisticated vocabulary. So let's look at a few of those. Over here on the left, water. Water comes to us straight from the German. But when you're talking about aquatics, you're talking about a Latin-based word. House, again, another word that comes straight to us from German. But when you talk about a domicile, this little more sophisticated use of the word is from a Latin base. Same with many compared to numerous, truth, more sophisticated word, veracity, like, similar, happiness, felicity. You can see the common use of our Teutonic or Germanic words with the more sophisticated use of our Latin vocabulary. Another thing that makes learning the vocabulary of Latin a bit easier is many English words are taken directly from Latin with little or no change in spelling. Animal is A-N-I-M-A-L in Latin, and we have taken it directly. You can see that in labor, in area, in camera, in campus, and chorus. These are straight Latin words that we have taken and used in English. And so we have hundreds and hundreds of these to make it much easier to learn the vocabulary. And of course, some of our words are just taken from the Latin base and added to it with prefixes or suffixes. But one Latin word can be worth many English words, sometimes hundreds of words, by knowing one Latin word. An example I have here is the verb moneo, which means to warn, advise, or inform. And this is one that has about 200 English words that use this word as a base. A few of them here: admonish, demonstrate, monster, premonition. If you took someone who didn't know Latin, they would never think that those were related to each other. And yet, a Latin student understands the base they're looking at, moneo, and can see that admonish and monster and monument, actually, they can understand the meaning behind it. Of course, there are some relationships of words from Latin to English that really don't seem to make sense in a way. And so we have to go a little bit back into history and to some of the legends and things to see how those words came to be. So very often in our word studies, I will show you, and we will go through some of those reasons. How can monere, meaning to warn, be a root for our word money? That just doesn't seem to relate. And so we look at this legend here. And so because of an earthquake, which there were a lot of them in Italy, a voice was heard coming from Juno's temple warning of impending sacrifice. She became later known as Juno Moneta, or Juno the Warner. And it was in her temple, was one of the handful of temples that the Romans used to manufacture their coins. So the idea moneta came to, we got our word monetary and mint, and of course anglicized to our word money. So it's interesting and fun to learn these facts that don't seem to relate and yet do very much so as we look back into history. Of course, as we're looking to build our vocabulary, we have to consider our prefixes and suffixes. Now, Latin's prepositions are our prefixes, and they mean the same thing. So it's interesting. They have meaning to parts of words. So our ob means from or away from. Below that, odd means to or toward. Okay? De means from, and a or x means from or out of. Okay? In is in or into, and sub means under or up from below. Okay, so these are prepositions that have meanings. But when we start adding them to Latin verbs, from very simple Latin verbs, if you'll notice in that the second one down has ad voco. Voco means call. Under that, specto means look at or watch. Porto means carry. Those are very simple verbs that we get in the very beginning chapters of my first volume. And such, you start learning your prepositions and adding those onto them, you get a whole new set of words that we can use in Latin. But look to the right with the derivatives, you get a whole new set of English vocabulary coming straight from those words. So you begin to build your vocabulary exponentially rather than word by word, dictionary entrance by dictionary, from list by list through vocabulary books year after year. This is a much more effective way to build your vocabulary. We can see more of that when we just add one simple new prefix to verbs we already know, and we do a word study in this. So re means back or again. And so we can add those onto those verbs, get a whole new set of verbs and a whole new set of English words that are derived from that. So think exponential when you build your vocabulary. And of course, below here we see the suffix ia generally has the form of y in English. So colonia is colony, gloria, glory, inuria, injury. And we can see those English words very easily in those. And Similarly, the suffix tia, also cia, generally has the form of ce as a suffix in English. So absentia is absence, patiencia is patience, and we can learn and see our English in that very easily. And of course, probably some of the most helpful are the spelling helps you get. Not just vocabulary, but actual spelling principles that we get. Of course, double consonants and silent letters are the bane of our English spelling. So let's start with the double consonant. If a Latin word has a double consonant, it's usually preserved in English, except at the end of a word. So let's look at a few. Terrestrial comes from terra, meaning earth or land. That double R in terrestrial is retained because of the double R in terra. Let's look below that to carus, meaning wagon or cart. The double R in carus is retained in our word carriage. Okay? And we see that in several words. These are just a few words here. And we see these double consonants sometimes because we have those prefixes we learned a minute ago coming up against base words, and one ends in a consonant, one begins with a consonant, and they don't pronounce well. So we have the principle of assimilation of consonants. So we have odd, con, in, ob, ex, and sub, which are the most common prefixes that we have that end in a consonant. So if we start analyzing English words, you can tell, and Latin students know whether a consonant is to be doubled or not. We have con added to modus. The N and the M come together. They do not pronounce well, so we assimilate the end of the consonant in the prefix with the base to give us commodus. Okay, that's a Latin word. Now, what if we added another prefix to it? Odd, meaning to or toward. Well, that D in odd comes against the C of commodus, and it does not pronounce well, and it must assimilate. So we have the derivative from those three principles accommodate, where we have two C's and two M's. It's probably one of the most misspelled English words because we are not used to having two doubled consonants in a word. That kind of throws everybody. A Latin student has no problem with it. They recognize when they see the word accommodate, it's odd plus con plus modus. They know the principle of assimilation. They know the double consonants they need, and they have a clue to the meaning. Look down at the word commend. Commendus is from the Latin. It has double M. So the double M is going to continue to be in our Latin word. And you add re to that, meaning back or again. You recommend. You understand it has the two M's, but it has only one C. Why? Because re does not end in a consonant that needs to be assimilated. So Latin students know when to double consonants and when not to, and they can know that for sure. Looking down at the very bottom, in plus material, in means not when it's added to an adjective. So immaterial is double M. Look at accelerate, odd plus celer. Odd means to or toward. Celer actually means swiftness or speed. So you speed toward, okay? You odd is assimilated with the C in celer to give us a double C in accelerate. On the last line, sub plus fictio, those two, the B and the F, have to assimilate to give us the double F in sufficient. Ex plus fictio, they have to assimilate and become efficient, the double F. And then we have de plus fictio, okay? And the de assimilate. Oh, wait a minute. No, it doesn't assimilate. There is only one F in the word deficient. Why? Because the prefix ends in a vowel, not a consonant, that needs to be assimilated. So deficient only has one F. Latin students know this automatically and never have problems with this spelling. Of course, silent letters are another bane of our English spelling. And so either they're silent or they're very weak sounding, but the Latin word will give us the clues to the spelling. Let's look at that word debt, D-E-B-T. Why in the world is there a silent B in that word? Well, because it comes to us from debeo debitus, meaning to owe something. So you owe somebody something, you have a debt. Below that, receipt. Why in the world is there a P in the word receipt? We don't hear it, we don't spell it, we don't say it. It's because it comes to us from recipio, and the P is retained from the original Latin language. Go straight across from there to reign. The king reigns from his throne, R-E-I-G-N. Why in the world is there a G there? Well, it comes to us from regnum, meaning kingdom or kingship, and the G is retained from that. Right below that, you'll notice the Latin word annus, meaning year. That double N is retained in our derivative annuity. And of course, down below that, there is only one L in celer. Remember, I said that means swiftness or speed. And so that makes one L in accelerate. Okay? Students, other than Latin, might think, oh, let's double that L because mostly L's in the middle of the word seem to be doubled. But a Latin student knows, no, celer, there's only one L, and there's only one L in accelerate. Fun stuff to know and learn. Now, going beyond the word masteries that we get a lot of historical aspects to Latin is a language of history. Now, for good or for bad, for whatever, we take it as it is. Our calendar is all the months of the year are based on Latin words and such. And it's fun to see, and as we study this in one of our word studies, they've already learned the numbers septem, octo, novem, and decem, which are 7, 8, 9, and 10 in Latin. And they see, oh my goodness, there's September, October, November, December, and such. But soon realize that, wait a minute, those are the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th months, not 7, 8, 9, and 10. What happened there? Well, you're able to go back into that and realize that at a point in history, our calendar was rearranged. And the Caesars did this to deify themselves and such. And so if you look at July was inserted in honor of Julius Caesar. And August was inserted also from the first Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus as he rearranged. And that pushed September, October, November, December down to the 9, 10, 11, and 12. Fun things to know about history and such like that, and what happens to words as they change with people through history. Let's also look at, we do a word study on mottos and such. In fact, I encourage students, look at your state motto. Every state in the Union has a motto. You know, you have state birds, state very aspects of their state. But the motto will tell us actually a little bit about what the people were thinking at the time that your state became a state from in the Union. I just want you to look at the A pluribus unum, because that is the United States motto, and we've known that for a long time. It's on our money, one for many. But if you look at the literal Latin, A pluribus unum, we saw that A or X means out of. So A pluribus, out of the many, one, is what that literally means. And so at the thinking of the time, what was more important, the A pluribus, out of the many? The individual states at the time of the founding of our country had their own authority and their own power. They voluntarily came together to form the one. We forget about this many 250 years later because so much of the power is in our federal government, the one, and such that our states have lost a lot of their authority, only have some of their authority. But at the beginning of our country, out of the many came the one. That was something they voluntarily did. So it's interesting to watch and look at the literal Latin as opposed to what we've come to known as. We do a word study in law terms, and we actually learn what the words mean and how that actually is applied today with lawyers in our jurisprudence. Probably the most important thing that unfolded before me and my own kids as we studied Latin has to do with this chart right here. And I want to spend a little more time on that. We've talked about the word mastery and the clues that Latin provides English, but the best understanding of how languages work happens in this translation between Latin and English. As close as the words are, the structures are very different. Let's look at this a little bit. I want to take you into inflected and non-inflected languages, but I want to show you what that is. English is, by and large, a non-inflected language. In other words, we start with a word. The word doesn't change. We don't add things to it. It's non-inflected. It just changes position in the sentence to show the function of a word. So the noun horse can have 5 functions and such. So look at this. The horse stands in the field. Horse in this sentence is what? The subject of the sentence. That's right. Below that, the horse's saddle is made of leather. Now that apostrophe S will give us a clue that horse there is actually showing possession. The horse's saddle is made of leather. So that's another function of a noun. Below that, the farmer gives the horse some grain. What's the subject there? Farmer. What does he do? He gives. What does he give? He gives grain to the horse. The word horse in this sentence with those words in that configuration is the indirect object. Okay, below that, the cowboy rides his horse in the parade. Subject there is cowboy. What does he do? He rides. What does he ride? His horse. It's the direct object in that sentence. And the last sentence, the children like to sit on the horse. Okay, the subject there is children. What do? They like. But what do we have on the horse is a prepositional phrase. So horse in this sentence is the object of the preposition on. So you have subject, you have possession, you have indirect object, you have a direct object, you have the object of the preposition. Those are all the functions or the work that a noun can do in a sentence, the most common ones. Okay? Well, a noun can also show singular and plural. Okay? And we actually change our words slightly to do that. But Latin, okay, that's a non-inflected language. Latin is a highly inflected language. What does that mean? That means we have a piece of Latin added on to a base to give function. Okay, what does that mean? We don't do that with our nouns. We don't even do that with our adjectives. We don't do that with any part of speech. We do that to some of our verbs. We'll add endings to change their function a bit. But Latin is highly inflected, so it changes a lot. So what we have is we have endings that will tell us the 5 functions, both singular and plural. The Latin word for horse is equus. Okay, you take that us off of it, EQU is actually the base, and we're going to add endings to those to tell the functions singular and plural. So it will be like this: equus, equi, equo, equum, equo. So the 5 singular. The plural ones would be equi, equorum, equis, equos, equis. Yes, you learned 10 different Latin words, slightly different words, in a pattern that stand for the functions of the noun horse in Latin, both singular and plural. Now, what's so good about that? Because you think, oh my goodness, I can't memorize all those. Well, you'll be surprised, and we will work on it, and it will make sense to you tremendously. But what you have is you can look at a Latin word, say equus, E-Q-U-U-S. Looking at that word, I can tell you that is the word horse, singular, and subject of the sentence. If I see equum, equum, I can tell you immediately from that word, without any other words around it, that that is the singular word horse, the direct object of its sentence. If I see equus, I can tell immediately from that word that it is the plural horses and it's the direct object in its sentence. It doesn't need all the other words for context. Context in Latin, there is some, but not as much as in English. In English, context is everything. The horse stands in the field cannot be switched around to say the field stands in the horse. You change the entire meaning. So what you have are two different language structures that we, and this is my emphasis, that we translate back and forth between each other and learn the details of both of them well. Now, why is this so important? Because most of the languages of the world are either pictorial, non-inflected, or inflected. Okay, so pictorial, there aren't too many of them. Like if you think Chinese with its characters is a pictorial type language. Most of them then fall into inflected and non-inflected. So by learning Latin with a full English grammar built into it, your students and yourself, you are learning how most of the languages of the world work. And this is why Latin students go on to pick up other languages so easily. Okay, you will find those that they know Latin, they've had it in school, and their first language they've learned, Spanish, French, Italian. I mean, all of those words come very simple. And so that is another. This was best use of our time. All right, so what have we seen? During the study that I do with you, you'll not only gain a scholarly vocabulary, but learn to translate between inflected language Latin and non-inflected language English, and mastering the details of both languages in the process. Okay? So, at the same time, you'll be introduced to the vocabulary that'll make Spanish and French and Italian, Portuguese, and even Romanian, if you wanted to learn that, easier to learn. So that makes this study one of those foundational, and it's sure worth all the effort you put into it. For those of you parents and teachers desiring to teach the Latin Road English grammar to your own students, the curriculum that I've written will give you all the resources for you to learn and teach at the same time. For those of you with students 11 to 16 years old who would be interested in my online classes, you can view my written class flyer in the articles section of my website, as you can see on this slide. If you have questions or to enroll your students, you can email me on my address here, barbara@thelatinroad.com. Please do that by September 1. I want to make personal phone calls to each and every one. Easy way for me to meet you and to have you feel comfortable with the process of these classes. I look forward to meeting you, and I will be available to any questions you might have. Thank you.